Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the board for Tuesday, November the 24th, 2020. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and if we could please stand for the land acknowledgement and the national anthem.
We would like to acknowledge
that we are here today
on the traditional territory
of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
Nous tenons à reconnaître que nous sommes sur le territoire traditionnel
des Mississaugas de la
Première Nation de Credit.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Quand on grâce est porté le pays, il s'est porté la croix, ton histoire.
Approval of the agenda. There's one amendment to the agenda. Item 8.3C has a revised roadmap for Directive 16 on the anti-racism policy. And with that amendment, I will approve the agenda as amended. There are no special presentations this evening. I have no conflict of interest with any of the items on the agenda. Item number 3.1, the regular meeting of the board November the 10th. Having read the minutes of the regular meeting of the board November 10th, 2020, I now approve them. There are no notices of motion and petitions this evening, and we're now on item number 5, section for recognition. 5.1, recipient of the Ontario Council for Exceptional Children, OCEC Educational Leader of the Year Award, Local Halton Peel Chapter 391, and Provincial. It is with great pleasure that I announce that Sean Moynihan, Superintendent of Special Educational Support Services, was given this award. The Ontario Council for Exceptional Children is a community of educators and partners in learning dedicated to advancing the success of students with exceptionalities in Ontario. I'd like to announce that Dr. Sean Moynihan has been selected to receive the local Halton Peel Chapter 391 and the Provincial Award as the OCEC Educational Leader of the Year. This award exemplifies an individual in a supervisory role who has made a significant contribution to students with special needs and who has increased the awareness of parents, administrators, and the school community regarding exceptional children and youth. The nomination for this award was received from the Coordinating Principals of Special Education at the Peel District School Board. I would like to share a few of the highlights from the nomination letter. Dr. Sean Moynihan is a highly dedicated and caring leader that puts the best interests of students at the forefront of everything he does. He works tirelessly and collaboratively with staff to provide input, support, and to advocate on behalf of students with special education needs. Sean collaboratively developed, revised, and implemented many operating procedures, policies, guidelines, and processes to support student success and safety through the lens of modern learning. During meetings with families, staff, and community stakeholders, he listened to concerns to truly understand the needs of children and youth with exceptionalities and used this information to guide change. He advocated for greater support and inclusion of students in their home school community and the importance of considering their human rights in all decision-making. He led the Special Education Advisory Committee with transparency, and through the lens of equity and inclusion to advance the field and the quality of special education. We are extremely proud of the significant contributions Dr. Moynihan has made advocating for children and youth with special needs and their families. Our special education students have benefited from his strong leadership and advocacy as he truly embodies the Peel traits as a leader to inspire success, confidence, and hope in our students. Sean, with our deepest appreciation, congratulations. 5.2, retirements. Our retirements for this month are Willie Clemens, Leocadia Zita, Kim Eberts, Carol King, Linda Larwell, Doris Martin, Nancy McEvoy, Estes Mustakalis, Diane Nowoselski, Christina Ruffalo, Laura Smith, and Agnes Voros. To all of you, thank you for your many years of service and dedication to the Peel District School Board, and we wish you every success in your future endeavors. We have no delegations this evening, and moving on to new business item 7.1, recommendations of the Audit Committee, November 13th, 2020. Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you, Supervisor Rodriguez. It is my pleasure to turn the introduction of this report over to Comptroller of Finance, Tanya Alateshe. Charles.
Good evening.
Good evening, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, through you, Superintendent Rodriguez. So before you, you have our 2019-2020 financial statements. First of all, I want to thank staff for supporting a successful year-end process, given these difficult times, and being able to complete our audit with a clean audit report from our auditors. I do want to potentially highlight a few key items in the financial statements, just for the board's knowledge. So if you go to page 34 of your report, this will be the board's balance sheet. I'm going to just talk high level of a few significant things that occurred this year that impact a lot of the numbers that you will see both in our balance sheet and in our income statement. First of all, when we compare our average daily enrollment both to our original budget for 1920 and if we compare to prior year, we did have a slight increase in ADE. So we had higher enrollment, and obviously therefore our funding would have increased. Additionally, we had the strike this year, and due to the strike, we did have some initial savings. When I say initial savings, we do have to report these to the ministry, and the funding for that savings will be recouped by the ministry in future funding flows. But at least for our 1920 financial statements, you will see the variances predominantly in our cash numbers, because right now we still have that cash on hand, as well as in terms of some variances in our income statement. Additionally, due to COVID that transpired in mid-March, where we did have school closures, and then eventually, even though we had online learning, we did not have a lot of in-school activities. There are some savings through there as well. If we look, the other thing that the ministry did this year, because they allowed the municipalities to flow municipal taxes at a later time, they deferred those. They themselves flowed monies to us a bit earlier. As a result, we do have monies that are owed back to the ministry for the municipal taxes that they flow to us, which will then come from the municipalities eventually. So we do have a receivable from the municipalities. And if you look at the variances on the balance sheet, the two areas that you will see significant variances are in our accounts receivable, and that would be as a result of the municipal taxes that are owed to us from the municipalities, and that's about $159 million. And then you will see a corresponding reduction in our accounts receivable from the Government of Ontario, from the ministry, and that is again because they have flowed us the municipal taxes. It reduces the amount that they owe us because that has been deducted from that. Additionally, on the balance sheet, the only other item I would draw a little bit some attention to is that we do have some increase in our deferred revenue. And deferred revenue generally is for revenues. We do have a lot of grants that are based on deliverables, and this year, because some of the things we could not deliver, we were able to defer those revenues to this coming year, which is 2020-21. And therefore, as a result, our deferred revenues in 1920 a bit higher because those revenues will be used in this year. Additionally, we will note that the net debenture debt, which is lower down in our balance sheet, has been reduced by about $31 million, and that is a result of the fact that the ministry now is funding our capital differently, and so they're no longer doing that through debenture payments, and as a result, that has gone down. If I turn to the next page, which is our profit and loss, or our P&L, you will notice that the provincial grants are lower than our original budget, and that again is through the factors I mentioned before, mainly as through strike savings that we have to pay back to the ministry, which has been offset also though with increase in average daily enrollment. As well, this year we did get funding for all the collective agreements that were settled during the year. So we did also receive monies for the 1% salary increase, as well as the 4% that most of the unions did get in terms of their benefit payments. The only thing I would, sorry, was there a question?
No, continue.
Yeah. The only other thing I was going to call out is you will notice school generated funds. There's a significant decrease both on the revenue side as well as on the expenses. Now, school generated funds are the monies that the schools collect for different activities at the school level. So whether it be field trips and other types of funds that they collect at the school level. And you will notice that there was a significant decrease this year, both in the collection as well as the expenditure, and that is directly as a result of the school closure and COVID, as there were not as many activities at the school level after March. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions in terms of any specific other items.
Thanks, Ms. Alatija. Charles, for that summary. Just one sort of clarity piece in terms of draft. On page 28 of the agenda, it speaks to the draft consolidated financial statements. Are these draft statements or the actual final consolidated statements?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, these are the final. However, they need to be approved by the board. So they are in draft until they are approved.
Great, thank you. I've gone through in detail the consolidated financial statements, and given that the audit committee has done its due diligence, I will not probe line by line items at this point. However, I do have just a couple questions that are more sort of high level, large questions just for confidence from the side of the board. Did the auditors have any concerns with the consolidated statements? And if they provided any insight into how we could be better, or any promising practices that might be helpful, and what would they happen to have been if they did that?
Through you, Chair Rodriguez, Supervisor Rodriguez, I apologize. The auditors generally do what they consider a management letter, and in that management letter, they would provide, to your point, if there's any kind of recommendations, both to the finance side of the organization, but also to the IT side. And I can tell you that for this year, there were no management letter points on either the financial side or the IT side.
Thank you for that, Ms. Alatisha Charles. My final question is, did the audit committee have any concerns with the consolidated financial statements? And were there any particular area that they probed most about?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. No, they did not have any specific questions. I did go through a slightly more detailed line by line with them and on both statements, as well as some of the notes, and there were no specific concerns.
Thank you so much, Ms. Alatisha Charles. With that, I approve the consolidated financial statements for the Peel District School Board for the year ended August 31st, 2020, Appendix 1, and I approve that the Audit Committee report for 2019-2020, which has been approved by the Audit Committee, be submitted by the Board to the Ministry of Education, Appendix 2, and I receive as information the following reports from the Committee: Audit Committee Work Plan, Compliance Report for Fiscal Year 2019-2020, and Regional Internal Audit Team Audit Plan Status. Thanks again for all of your work and for staff's work, and certainly Director Russell Rollins, your work, and AD Gill. Thank you. Moving on to item 8.1, Director's Update. Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. Tonight, my Director's Update will focus on opportunities to engage parents and families, the recently implemented community learning model for our secondary students, and an update on engaging communities and students in understanding the changes to the Regional Learning Choices program. Firstly, we're going to ask everyone to save the date. Our Great Start will take place on Wednesday, December the 9th, 2020. Great Start is an annual orientation opportunity for school council members to learn about the function of school councils and network with other school councils. Given the current public health situation, this year's Great Start will be different. While we have traditionally hosted the event at a local Peel board school, this year's event will be held virtually and will be open to all school council members. The event will feature a keynote speaker, a presentation on the roles and responsibilities of school councils, and a facilitated panel discussion led by the board's Parent Involvement Committee. We welcome and encourage all school council members to attend this event. There is also an elementary online learning information session for families to be held on November 26th. This will support caregivers of children studying online and answer any questions that they may have about learning online. And in order to increase transparency and communication, the minutes of the Parent Involvement Committee will be included in the board meeting agenda, as they are tonight, and in our future agendas. We also have made a significant shift in our secondary learning model. As the COVID-19 pandemic has evolved, so too have the needs of families and our school system as a whole. To best serve families and students during these challenging times, in October, we provided families with the option to switch learning models after they had some time to experience the 2020-2021 school year. In order to provide a more consistent learning environment for students, all of our secondary schools moved to a hybrid of the two existing models, the adaptive model and the online learning model. This is called our community learning model. Students are continuing to attend classes through their chosen learning model, which is online or in the adaptive, but they're being taught simultaneously by the same teacher from their home school in most situations. The community learning model brings more flexibility and stability to our system as the pandemic evolves and as families adjust their learning model choice. It will reduce the need for further reorganizations through this school year, and it also allows us to offer a wider range of courses and programs to our secondary students, whether students are learning from home or at school. This is an important factor in student success. The community learning model came into effect for Quadmester 2, which began last week. While there have been positive aspects to this change, we also understand that this is a new way of teaching and learning in the middle of the most challenging period in recent memory. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the tremendous efforts of both central and school-based staff in moving to the community learning model. Your effort and dedication to students is sincerely appreciated. It's also clear that adjustments will be needed as we hear from families, students, and staff, and we are committed to engaging in collaborative problem solving to address those challenges. The video that will be shared this evening was created by the Media Services team to provide an overview of the community learning model. I'd welcome the media team to begin this video when ready.
We know the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound effect on the lived experiences of students, families, and staff members, and it's critical to acknowledge the disproportionate impact for some people within certain identity groups. As the pandemic has evolved, so too has our response to the needs of families and our schools. Each of you have adjusted to a new and different school year during these unprecedented times. Recently, we've had to make additional changes to respond to a shift in enrollment numbers for our online and adaptive learning models for grades 9 to 12. To provide a more consistent learning environment for students, all secondary schools will move to a hybrid of the two existing models for the start of our next quadmester, beginning November 18. We call this our community learning model. Our community learning model is a classroom blended of students who have chosen to attend classes either online or in an adaptive learning schedule. You will be taught at the same time by the same teacher from your home school. This model will help us be more flexible to support you as the pandemic and your needs evolve. It also means we can offer a wider range of courses and programs to all secondary students. All students will be included in their home school's timetable. Students attending their local school or vocational level 2 program will be placed in a cohort similar to the start of the school year. In the community learning model, there are 3 cohorts of students. Let's take you through what a typical day will look like. Cohort A and B students will attend morning classes in person 2 days one week and 3 days another. When they are not in the classroom during the school day, they will join online. Cohort C students will tune into lessons from your home 5 days a week using one of the board's online learning platforms. This will allow for more comprehensive course content delivery for all students, as teachers will not need to repeat lessons throughout the week. Students who have gone through the IPRC process into a developmental disabilities class or vocational level 1 program, whether online or in person, will attend every day for the full day and will also participate in the community learning model. This will help with building a sense of community for all students and staff. We know that having a connection back to the home school will help with student success for all learners, and in particular for students with special education needs. Based on the needs of each classroom, appropriate technology such as a Chromebook with a camera and microphone built in will be provided. These devices are accessible, adaptive, and flexible for both the student and educator. As schools evolve with the community learning model, staff may introduce additional tools and technology into the classroom. Teachers will have the option to direct the camera at themselves or share their screen with voice communication to help explain concepts to students. We understand and share your concern about the privacy of students. We share that concern. We will do everything possible to protect your teen's privacy. Schools will have sufficient Wi-Fi capabilities to minimize disruption with online streams. Secure online platforms such as D2L Brightspace and Google Classroom will allow students to interact with their teacher and classmates in real time through chat and video functionality. Using these tools, students can securely submit work for evaluation. Students should bring and use their own device. If you need support with technology and/or internet access, please contact your school's principal. Teachers will continue to take attendance for all students, regardless of whether they are attending in person or online. It's expected that students actively participate during online sessions while at home. You will continue to be assessed on your work and achievement of course expectations throughout the quadmester. Students working towards their Ontario Secondary School diploma will still receive a final grade. At times, students may need to complete assignments and coursework offline. During this time, they will not be expected to be actively online and engaged in the classroom, but rather work on assigned work. Your teacher will notify and explain as needed. Whether you are learning at home or in person, your teacher will provide you with the best learning experience possible and meet you where you are going to learn best. This is a time of incredible change for everyone, but we're excited to connect with you in this new way of teaching and learning. Know that our dedicated, skilled, and professional staff are there to support you. If you have questions, your teacher or principal are there to help. You can also find more information about the community learning model at www.peelschools.org/reopening.
Again, thank you very much to all of the staff who made this transition to the community learning model a positive one so far, and you have our renewed commitment to supporting you and making it a success for all of our students and our staff. Lastly, I'd like to provide a brief update on the communication to families and students about regional learning choice programs. The Peel District School Board's regional learning choice programs empower students by providing them with opportunities to explore their skills in a particular area of interest, such as the arts, business, technology, sports, skilled trades, and leadership. The board offers 6 different elementary regional learning choice programs in 12 schools and 11 different secondary regional learning choice programs across Brampton, Mississauga, and Caledon. This fall, the board engaged in a communication campaign to inform grade 8 families about secondary regional learning choice program applications. In addition to the virtual information nights and live Q&As hosted by secondary schools, the board centrally shared information about the program application process through its website, social media channels, school websites, emails, and other forms of communication to Peel families. The board also partnered with parent representatives from the board's We Rise Together Community Advisory Council to host a virtual information session on November 18th at 5:30 for families of African, Black, Caribbean, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis students, but was available for anyone to attend. Over 120 participants joined the virtual meeting, which provided a step-by-step overview of the application process as well as other important information. The feedback from participants was overwhelmingly positive, with many families commenting that the session was in fact quite helpful. This is an important step in our opening up of the program to ensure that students who traditionally have not gained access into this program due to barriers, those students of Black, African, and Caribbean, as well as Indigenous identities, will not, as you know, take place in the lottery this year. As long as they meet the entrance criteria, they will be accepted into the program. Our first step is ensuring that families and students are aware of the changes and ensure that they know how to apply to these programs and have the information that they require. Given the interest, turnout, and positive preliminary feedback, the suggestion has been made to host another information session specifically for elementary students in January of 2021. A recording of the information session is available on the Peel Board's Family Webinars page and was shared broadly throughout our social media channels. Thank you very much, and that concludes the Director's update for this evening.
Thank you for the update, Director Russell Rollins, and thanks for the video as well. That was very well done. Moving on to item 8.2, COVID-19 school planning update number 3. Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much. This is our third report that provides for the public and for the supervisor an overview of aspects of our support for learning and for operations This evening's report provides an update on several important aspects of the district's support for learning and will be presented by Ted Byers, retired superintendent, who has assumed leadership responsibilities for our COVID learning and operations. Acting Associate Director Shirley Ann Teal, Associate Director Jaspal Gill, and Comptroller Antoine Haroun. And so I would ask members of the team in sequence to present their sections. Thank you. We will begin this evening with Superintendent Ted Byers, who is online.
Thank you. This is Ted Byers. I hope that everyone can hear me.
Thank you, Superintendent. We can.
Thank you. And through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, it's my pleasure to speak to the first section of this report, which is before you. Let me begin by saying it is certainly a privilege to work with the central team in terms of the board's pandemic response. It is commonplace these days, I think, to use words of exaggeration like extraordinary and unprecedented, but I say without hesitation that it certainly is a privilege to work with this extraordinary team who put in lots of effort in order to provide strength, and it's their confidence that brings, I think, confidence to the board in times of uncertainty and fluidity. This central team is comprised of the 2 school support officers, who I think everyone is familiar with, provide support in a variety of ways to schools throughout the board, but certainly in these times coordinate our pandemic response support. And they are joined by other elementary and secondary administrators, some retired and some active, who whether full-time or part-time create a team of about 6 folks in order to provide this support to the system. The support comes in 4 different dimensions. The first is through internal communications. So they do that through memos and communication clearly to the system with the support of the communications department, responding to emails and other queries from the system, but especially also refining and revising our operating procedures to guide our work. These procedures are modified and revised, sometimes for things like changes in the season, as those necessitate changes of procedure, but more often in changes in response to processes and direction from Peel Public Health, etc. So that's the first dimension of the work. Secondly, I would say the liaison with Peel Public Health. This has always been part of the work of school support officers, but certainly in this case, even more so. There are regular meetings to work through processes around outbreaks and others. And that is the liaison with Peel Health. Thirdly, there is the dimension of ministry reporting. There's frequent reporting, including daily calls with the ministry, moderating the daily school reports that are required by 10:30 in the morning and ensuring the accuracy of that data. And finally, this team does case management, which is probably the bulk of their work when there are cases that are identified across our system of COVID. This team helps support school staff and implements the orders and the direction from Peel Public Health across the system. So that is the work of the central team, and it is now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Shirley Ann Teal, who will speak to the next section of the report.
Thank you, Superintendent Byers, and through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. Peel District School Board has always been very proud of the relationships that we have with the child care operators and the programs that we share in our schools as we work together to serve the needs of all of our families. This relationship has allowed us this year especially to work very closely with our operators and with the Region of Peel as we have prepared for all of the safety measures that need to be put in place in our schools during the pandemic. We have balanced the needs and the expectations from the Ministry of Education as far as schools go along with the needs and the expectations from the Child Care in the Early Years Act. Areas such as screening for symptoms, monitoring, responding, communicating with parents, the use of PPE, all of those are quite similar in both groups, but there is the also added layer that the expectations are just a little different in each. So we have been meeting with our operators in the region really since early August, almost on a bi-weekly basis, to work through that, to make sure that when parents come into our schools, use our services, if you will, and work with our child care operators, that they really are experiencing that seamless day that's so important to all of us. And again, I'll emphasize that it is the relationships that we've built that has made this very successful with our operators. We are aware of each of our operators, their protocols and the safety measures they put in place as they need to develop that, and they have shared all of that in writing with the school board. They also work very closely with the team that Superintendent Byers has just spoken about. The only change since this report was written, Supervisor Rodriguez, is with the recent lockdown in Peel in Toronto. That has also impacted our early on centers, and the ministry has directed that for the time of the lockdown that the early on centers be closed as well. So they have done that effective this week, and we will continue to interact with our partners and be ready to welcome them back to our schools with the parents and families just as soon as we're able to. Thank you.
Thank you, EDTL, and through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, wanting to provide the board an update on COVID-related expenditures. Over the last few months, both the provincial and federal government have made multiple funding announcements to assist school boards in meeting COVID-related expenditures. A summary of our board's allocation of these funds is included in the report. To date, board has been allocated $33.5 million in additional funding as part of these announcements. In addition, recognizing the significant cost pressures on school boards, Ministry also announced that boards would be allowed to access up to 2% of their operating allocation from available accumulated surplus. Our board's allowable use of accumulated surplus is $36.6 million, of which $5.5 million was previously allocated to balance the 2020-21 budget, leaving the board with $31.1 million available to put towards additional reopening costs. Staff has calculated the COVID-related expenditures and have projected these expenditures for the 2021 school year. These costs are summarized in the report. The total projected costs are estimated to be approximately $52 million. In addition, I wanted to highlight the impact of enrollment decline. As reported at the last board meeting, this year, elementary enrollment is down by 2,612 students and the secondary by 75 students. As most of the school board funding is based on enrollment, it is estimated that the enrollment decline will result in funding reduction of approximately $27 million. To reduce the impact of this funding reduction, staffing was adjusted as part of the September reorg. In summary, taking into account the additional funding, impact of enrollment decline, and additional costs related to COVID, it is anticipated that the board will need to fully access the 2% of its operating allocation from available accumulated surplus. Staff will continue to monitor the expenditures and plans to report back to the board on a quarterly basis. I will now turn over to CIO Anton Rohn for technology update.
you, Associate Director Gill, and through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have been working tirelessly to ensure equity of access to technology for our students. To date, we have distributed over 35,000 devices to support students who do not have access to a device at home in support of distance learning and online learning. As a support to the community learning model that we have heard about and seen earlier this evening, that has started with Quadmaster 2, we have been working with all the schools, especially secondary schools, to ensure all classrooms have been equipped with the technology to allow the teachers and the students to be able to interact and be successful. A plethora of devices have been provided to the various classrooms, including projectors, webcam, mic combinations, Chromebooks, Apple TVs, and other types of devices, laptops and as such. We also have, through the Refer program at the board, a number of devices that are for students to keep, and we work with school administrators to provide the students with these devices for them to keep, and they include desktops, laptops, Chromebooks, and iPads. At this point, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, staff. Just by way of conclusion, the Peel District School Board, families, students, and staff, I think, have demonstrated our joint commitment to student learning by embracing new ways of teaching, learning, and connecting through the COVID-19 health pandemic. Students' ability to adapt and change has allowed the focus, staff's ability to adapt and change has certainly allowed for the focus to remain on student learning, well-being, equity, and health and safety. I'd like to acknowledge the staff who continue to remain focused on how we support education through these constantly evolving times. Thank you very much to all the staff who've contributed to this report and on a daily basis continue to make our environments safe and supportive to work and to learn.
Thanks to all. Just a couple of questions. The first one, it's sort of not directly to the report, but just overall about the COVID piece. We receive reports, Director, on a regular basis of cases of COVID in certain classrooms at certain schools each day. Do we keep aggregated data on this as an overall reference? And is that something that we can access at any point just to kind of get a feel for what's going on?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, that information is collected at varying levels by the Ministry of Education, the Province of Ontario, Peel Public Health, and also locally through our pandemic response team as described by Superintendent Byers. We also have information on our public website with regards to cases in schools that is available for the public to access. Right now, our most reliable source of information comes from Peel Public Health, who continue to monitor instances of the disease both in and out of our schools. Thanks, Director Russell-Rollins. In terms of funding, on page 60 of the agenda, it refers to, as A.D. Gill just spoke to, the $33.5 million total that was allocated to PDSB by the ministry, and then the use of our 2%, which was $33.1 million, that was part of the 2%. Given the total of $66.6 million, have we expensed all the $66.6 million at this point? Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, no, we have not. Okay, just, and then could I have some clarity on the 52, which is the expected sort of, I think, I was looking at it earlier, it's the estimated total of 52. Is that 52 within the 66.6, leaving us with a surplus, or is that 52 over and above the 66.6? Associate Director Gill.
Thank you, Dr. Russell-Rollins. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. 52 is within the 64 34.6 million. It is within that.
So we would anticipate that we will have some monies remaining after the estimated costs of what's been identified here?
The one area, I think, as I indicated in my information, that is the enrollment decline, that we are still calculating the impact of that enrollment decline, and that will definitely need to also be covered through the $66.5 million. So that's why I indicated that we expect that we will fully utilize. If the expenditure continue the way we have projected through the year, that we have fully anticipate that we will use all of that 2% that is available to the board.
And if I may add, the costs in the chart entitled Estimated Cost Increases Due to COVID-19 are a projection for the year.
Yes, they
and so there may be additional cost pressures in any one or all of these lines that would also account for the difference between the 52 and the $64.6 million.
Thank you. That's very helpful, actually. The other question that I had, Director Russell Rollins, was on page 61. Just need some understanding on the difference between the 11.5 million for teaching staff on the one table, which is on page 60, and the corresponding numbers for elementary, secondary, and ECE's teachers on page 61 that add up to 31.4 million. Could you help me understand the difference between those two?
Associate Director Gill.
Yeah, through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. On page 60, 11.5 for teaching staff, that is the funding, additional funding that we have received from the ministry. Whereas on page 61, the cost, elementary teachers, second, those are the projected costs that the board will incur for the teachers as well as ECEs.
So for clarity purposes, am I to assume then the 11.5 will be used from that particular funding envelope, and then on top of that we will use another 31.4 million?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, definitely we will use 11.5, and the remaining funding out of that 34.4, that will come from the reserves. The remaining funding. First, we will use the additional funding,
and so
to meet our expenditures, and the remaining expenditure will then be paid out of the board's reserves.
And can I assume then, AD Gill, that when you say in the one table you speak about teaching staff and in the other you speak about elementary, secondary, and ECEs, that those two are in fact the same?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, yes, exactly, they are the same. So one side is the teaching staff funding, whereas on the other side is the expenditure, but they are exactly the same.
Awesome.
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, I would just highlight that this is an area that we are notably spending more money than our grant funding allows for. Therefore, we will be using reserve funding to augment our teaching staff as described in the chart entitled Estimated Cost Increases Due to COVID.
Awesome, thank you. Certainly you would expect that. That's great, thank you for all of that, it's very helpful. The distribution of devices is a great news story, and thanks to all for doing that. So yeah, thank you Superintendent Byers, thank you Comptroller Haran, thank you AD Teal, thank you AD Gill, and thank you Director Russell Rollins for all that. I will receive the report of the COVID-19 school planning update. Thanks. Item 8.3, which is Directive 5 Progress Report from Pro Tem Parliamentarian Governance Expert. Thanks to Lori for this report, and we will be looking at bringing an updated bylaws forward as perhaps as early as December the 8th. So I'm in receipt of the report and ask that the update regarding effective governance reports dated November 24th, 2020 be submitted to the Ministry of Education for information. Directive number 10, Equity Office Update, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. This report really is of an operational nature. It captures the positions that have been organized under our equity office as outlined in the Ministry of Education's report on the Peel District School Board and the Directive 10, which outlines who should be part of the equity office and the responsibilities that that office should hold.
Thank you. I was happy with the report. I just, not a question, but more a statement and just sort of a consideration. The newly created office and staff assigned on page 69 of the agenda, at the end you state that further adjustments to the structure may be undertaken in the 2021-2022 school year in alignment with the directives. I guess I'm just wondering if you would like to provide yourself and staff the leeway to make appropriate adjustments with community consultation during this school year as well. If that would be of any help or support, I just leave that more as a wondering than, because the way I think it's stated, at least if I've read it correctly, is that you're looking to make that this year would stay status quo in terms of the way you've reported it, and any other changes might occur in 2021, 2022. So just more of a wondering than really a question, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. Certainly through you, staff would welcome that opportunity, and where appropriate, we will do so.
Great. I'm in receipt of this report and ask that it be sent to the Minister of Education. Moving on to C, Directive 16, Anti-Racism Policy, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. One of the foundational policies that will support our commitment to achieving equity, anti-racism, and anti-oppression throughout our organization is an anti-racism policy. This was clearly stipulated in Directive 16 of the Ministry of Education's report on the Peel District School Board. An anti-racism policy will outline the organization's commitments to equity and inclusion pursued through an anti-racist, anti-oppressive perspective. It will include expectations of staff, students, communities, trustees, and will offer clarity about the complaint procedures to address any perceived contravention of those expectations and possible remedies. We believe this is the foundation of our commitment and is required not only by our staff and our students, but our communities. We have engaged an external consultant, Dr. Akwatu Kente, in developing a critical path and bringing his expertise along with community members and staff to the development process, as well as the consultation process and providing input into the content of this particular important policy. So it will be co-developed. It is led by Dr. Kente along with Rohan Thompson, Donna Ford, Associate Director Graywall, and myself and other key staff members and community members. Dr. Kente is online, and so I would provide him with an opportunity to give us a brief overview of this roadmap.
Good night, Supervisor Rodriguez. Just wanted to say at the outset that it's a privilege and an honor to work with PDSB staff, leaders, and stakeholders in this capacity. Column 1 involves a thorough review of all the reports that's been written about racism and racism-related challenges within PDSB, as well as the work that's been done to date. We want to harness all that work and build on it and moving ahead. Column 2 speaks to the different types of consultations that are planned both externally and internally with the widest variety of stakeholders, as well as with a thought being to focus on the different types of racism-related challenges that have occurred throughout the past years. Column 3 really involves an effort to make sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted in terms of the themes that have emerged, the issues that have been identified, and we will use key stakeholders to drill more deeply on some of the findings to make sure that we have it right in the final report. And I think that's a synopsis of what's planned to sort of get us to a draft policy by the end of January 2021.
Great, thank you. So nice to hear your voice, Dr. Kenty. Just one comment and one question. Again, Director Russell Rollins, thank you for undertaking this necessary and urgent work. I'm certainly excited by your high-level critical path that is in front of us. Familiar with the work of Dr. Kenty and thrilled that he is working with you on this critical path. The comment that I have is I'm sure that folks on the team have already thought about it, and you too as well, Dr. Kenty. It deals more with the how of the community engagement during these difficult times and having an opportunity to listen to as many voices as you can, as well as considering perhaps focus groups for voices that may not have readily been able to engage or come forward. So I'd leave it more as a comment for you. I know you're well familiar with it. However, just a comment specifically about column 2. Don't know if you have anything
Absolutely.
to... Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, no, we're looking at different mechanisms and trying to identify the ones that would work best for each community. Whether it's a thought exchange, a survey monkey, a focus group, or an interview, we actually will prioritize what works well and what's required to get the input from the community.
Thank you, appreciate that. And finally, my only question is about February 2021, when the policy comes to board. Can I assume that this policy will come to board, Director Russell Rollins, as draft in February, and that the team would be open to some suggestions that may come out of that meeting?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, yes, it will be a draft for consideration, and staff will certainly take feedback and bring forward a final policy for consideration.
Great, thank you. I'm excited. This is a good news story. I'm in receipt of this report and ask that it be sent to the Minister of Education. Thank you, Dr. Kenty, for being online with us this evening, and thank you, Director Russell Rollins.
Likewise.
8.4, the schedule of financial reports. Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you, Supervisor Rodriguez. Over to Associate Director Gill.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, and through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. This report is as per consistent with prior years. The report lists the timelines when the quarterly financial reports will be presented to the board. So they will be these reports will be presented for the period up to November 30th, and then up to February 20th, and then at the end of May 31st, and the last one at the August 31st.
Thank you, AD Gill. Just a point of clarification. The dates identify when the quarter ends. Do we have a sense of when the report would then come to board? Does it usually come to board at the next board meeting after the end of quarter, or does it usually come in the month after that?
To you, Supervisor Rodriguez, staff always try to have that report ready, usually the month after that period. Yes.
Great, thanks.
So the end of November report most likely may not be able to come in December, but for sure in January, first meeting in January.
Thanks, AD Gill. Thanks, Director Russell Rollins. I am in receipt of the schedule of financial reports. Moving on to item 8.5, working fund transfers for 2020 year end.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. Associate Director Gill will also speak to this report.
Sure. Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. Again, through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. As part of the Audit Committee recommendations, the consolidated financial statements for the 2019 and 20 year were approved tonight. The board ended the fiscal year with an operating surplus at year end. There are 3 recommendations in this report regarding the surplus. The first recommendation is the transfer of $37,641,178 to the working fund reserve, normally referred to as available accumulated surplus. Second recommendation is the transfer of funds to a dedicated working fund reserve, normally referred to as appropriated accumulated surplus. There are three specific transfers as part of this recommendation. First transfer is regarding school budgets. Each elementary school is allowed to roll over up to $8,000 and each secondary school up to $16,000 of their unspent funds from 1 year to the next year. Rollover allows the schools some flexibility in developing plans for the use of their funds, as well as allows them to meet commitments sometimes made in 1 year to the other. The second transfer is regarding operational funds. This transfer allows the implementation of specific central department projects and programs or initiatives that were budgeted during the 2019-20 year, but not completed until this year. The third transfer is regarding solar energy reserve. Board generates revenue from solar photovoltaic installations on its buildings. These funds are being used to improve instructional spaces, to provide cooling center in schools with no AC, and to implement improvements to reduce energy consumption. Unspent funds for 2019-20 are recommended to be set aside for this purpose. The last recommendation in the report is regarding the dedicated working fund reserve identified in recommendation 2. It allows the use of these funds to offset the applicable operating cost in 2020 to 21 or future years. Thank you, and I can respond to any questions.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins and A.D. Gill. A few questions. One is, what is the current working fund reserve?
We currently have just over $55 million.
Thank you. Could you help me understand exactly where the number 37,641,178 is coming from?
Yep, definitely. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, most of the funding, a large portion of the funding is coming, is a result of the system closure due to pandemic. So most of many of the schools, central departments, they were not able to spend the funds as they were planned. So most of a big chunk of that surplus is due to that system closure. So just as an example, the supply staff, supply teachers and other staff, we have savings of almost $12 million last year. And same thing with some teaching assistants, lunchroom supervisors, and we have savings or leftover funds from supplies and also from utilities as well, because our buildings were closed for a part of the last year.
Thank you for that. Through you, Director Russell Rollins, the school year-end rollover is $4.4 million. Were there additional monies that are clawed back that are unspent over and above the rollover? So what I'm asking is that the rollover in elementary is $8,000, the rollover per school is $16,000 in secondary and superintendents. That's what they're allowed to roll over to the next year. If there is a greater surplus than the $8,000, so let's say a particular school has $10,000 as a surplus, what happens to the other $2,000?
That goes into the board's general reserves or working fund reserve.
And do we have a total of that from the past year?
I don't have that figure with me.
No, that's fine. I was just wondering about that.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question that I have is the central, it's the understanding here of recommendation. I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around two things here, A.D. Gill. One is the understanding of recommendation 3, which is to approve the recommendation that the dedicated working fund reserves, appropriated accumulated surplus identified in recommendation 2 be transferred and used to offset the applicable operational costs in 2021. And is recommendation 2 asking that the transfer be dedicated to the dedicated reserve working fund, be dedicated as an appropriated accumulated surplus to those three areas. So I guess my confusion is recommendation 3 in contradiction to recommendation 2, or are those appropriated accumulated reserves similar?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, I'll try to clarify. So the recommendation 2, once approved, allows the board to have those 3 transfers and they go into dedicated working funds. So they're appropriate, they are as part of the surplus, but they are set aside for that purpose. And then the recommendation 3 then allows the staff to release those funds for those expenditures as mentioned in recommendation 2. So the recommendation 3 will allow the staff then to release those funds, for example, for school, they're almost $4 million. For central operational funds, for those projects or the initiatives of almost $3 million to be used within the year for those items.
Okay, so recommendation 3 keeps it appropriated to those 3 areas, and it's not giving you the leeway to do whatever you want with 2021 with the total of recommendation 2. Is that correct?
No, definitely. Through you, Supervisor, that's exactly right. So recommendation 3 allows the staff to only release the funds only for those 3 purposes. Yeah.
Comfortable with that? Thank you.
And that's why they are appropriated, not going into the general reserves.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I just wasn't clear as to what recommendation 3 was asking in terms of the appropriation, if it was appropriated to those 3 or if it was going to be appropriated to something else. And so that clarifies it. Thank you. Through you, Director Russell Rollins. I approve the recommendation of a transfer of $37,641,178 to the Working Fund Reserve, unappropriated accumulated surplus. I approve the recommendation of a transfer to a dedicated Working Fund Reserve appropriated accumulated surplus, August 31st, 2020, as follows. School and school support consumable funds in the amount of $4,354,001. Miscellaneous operational funds in the amount of $2,939,898, and solar energy reserve in the amount of $543,372. And I also approve the recommendation that the dedicated working fund reserves appropriate accumulated surplus identified in recommendation 2 be transferred and used to offset the applicable operational costs in 2020, 2021, or future years. Thanks again, Director Russell Rollins and A.D. Gill, for that report. Moving on to items 9, I will group items 9.1 to 9.5 and will deem them received. And we'll wait for items 9.6 through 9.10 on future agendas. And then moving on to item number 12, the adoption of in-committee reports, I should say. We will adopt the in-committee reports of November the 10th, 2020, and I also adopt the in-committee report of this evening, November 24th, 2020. I have no further questions about any of the items at this time, and so it is now time to adjourn. This meeting is now adjourned. Have a wonderful evening.